Thank you very much for having me and coming to hear some of these ideas that I've been thinking about for a number of years. And I think in the last, really in the last 6 to 8 months, there's been a big shift that is exciting for me and the work that I've been doing. And so I want to share some of the ideas that this has inspired. So we're going to be talking about smart buildings and immersive digital experiences. And how these things collide. So I'm going to start out with a little introduction about myself. Okay, just to give you a little bit about my background. I started out doing installation and performance art. So in the very beginning, for me, storytelling is key to human experience. I spent a couple of years studying traditional Korean folk singing. An incredible storytelling art form, and then went back to get a master's degree in technology, performance, installation, design at New York University, and then spent the next 10 and a half years in a experience design firm, heading up our lab and prototyping practice, and looking at how we integrate large, complex, multimedia interactive experiences into the built environment. And about 6 months ago, I joined Gensler, which is the largest architectural and design firm in the world. At any one moment, we're working on approximately 100 million square meters of space across all different areas, from airports to offices to multi-use, really a full spectrum. And for me, the transition was really natural because I really believe that we need to be surrounded by stories and culture, and that we're at a moment here in our lives where there's a real separation between culture, which lives up on a stage, and then our daily lives. And I think there's an opportunity for technology and the integration of technology and space to bring culture back into our everyday lives. So by working at a firm like this, it lets me start to think about integrating those things into our larger environment. So now I want to say smart buildings are cool. And when I say that, the reason that I think that smart buildings are cool, and this is the thing that we've seen change in the last 6 or 8 months, is there's been this huge adoption of smart home things, of IoT, of my children are setting scenes for our house and are triggering it by talking to their walls. And then at the same time, all of the technologies and the integration of technologies into commercial space and office space to support smart buildings is also blossoming. And the thing that's really interesting to me, and this is, if there's one point that I'd like to have you walk away with, is up until now, the built environment, the process to design for the built environment is really built on this waterfall process, right? You do one thing, it leads to another, and then you build it. On the digital design world, when we're designing for apps or software platforms, we work with a much more with an agile design process, a process where you have multiple iterations that you're constantly improving, right? And that's why your average architect is probably 70 when they're well known, where an average digital designer is like 26, because they've both done thousands of iterations in that amount of time. And what I see as the exciting opportunity with smart buildings is I think that we can start thinking about our built environment more as a digital platform. Right? And so I think that gives us an opportunity to make these much more responsive, exciting, and spaces that aren't done when the doors open, but are really just beginning. So typically when we think about smart buildings, we think about automated systems, lighting, HVAC, security, meeting rooms. Those are kind of the core aspects of automation. And then on the next slide, we then control these things from the back end with the building operator has a lighting control system, can look at how the space is being used in terms of efficiency, how people are moving through the space, how we're using the space. But When we think about this, we often think about it as the technology, but we really need to think about it as the people. And the people are both the end user, who are really worried about, it's my space, it's my lighting, it's my climate control, it's my happiness in my workspace. And then on the other side, you've got the operators. And the operators are really thinking about how we're operating this building. It's our people, our productivity, our efficiency. And so because once you switch to thinking about the people, it's no longer about creating the most advanced technology. It's really designing for that human experience and doing what we call human-centered design. Next. So at Gensler, I lead up the creative technology hardware group in our digital experience design group, which is about 80 people in a company of about 7,000 architects and designers. And we really focus on human-centered design, which is really starting with the end user or users, end user operator, whoever the people are, and really designing for them. Next slide. So typically in a smart building environment, we have these as our endpoints. We've got building sensors, we've got different interfaces, and so this is the standard set of endpoints that you might find in a smart building. And I want to posit that we need to shift, if we're really thinking about the user as a human being in built environment, we need to shift our idea of what these endpoints are to more immersive and connected experiences. Some of the things that really our team have been developing. And I think that this is really, if we're thinking about smart buildings as a space where you have a more efficient or a more successful building, you also need to be thinking about how you're creating a better environment and a more efficient and successful environment for the people within them. And in order to do that, you need to be able to introduce story. You need to be able to introduce this idea of culture into the space in order to create a better environment. So as soon as you do that, your end users shift. As soon as you introduce story, brand, any of these aspects into the built environment, it's no longer the head of facilities, it's no longer the head of real estate that's your client. They're one of your clients. But in commercial spaces, you have this amazing and exciting shift that you're now talking with the CMO. Or you're talking with internal communications or human resources, so that when they bring in their next round of recruits to bring into this culture, they have the whole building as a platform to tell their story, to engage people in the lifestyle of that environment. And so in order to really have a smart building, it's not just the sensors, it's not just the optimization of the physical space, but it's also creating a platform to tell the story of the space. And I would say that that's probably one of all of our collective biggest challenges, is that as long as we're talking to the head of real estate or the head of facilities, it's really all about numbers. It's about how many people you can get into that space, how efficient you can make it, and how much it's going to cost per butt in a seat. Where if you're talking to the CMO, if you're talking to the people that really care about what does it mean, what is the identity of this company, this culture, then all of a sudden it really broadens the opportunities to design something a lot more compelling. So I'm going to show a short video of some of the work that we've been doing here. So you can see over the last number of years, we've developed a bunch of really cool, immersive, and a little bit connected experiences. I would say that it's good practice and exercise for our team to understand how to integrate into the built environment, but the really exciting thing is what's coming next. And we've really invested in developing an entire team that is focused on connected spaces, that's focused on the smart building, the sensor, the understanding how the physical space is not a static space, but is a dynamic space and can be a platform. And I think it's when you merge that ability to have a real-time understanding of the function of your platform and combine it with some of the outputs that we've been designing for the last number of years is when you can really start to affect the human experience in these spaces. So I'm going to quickly walk through some of our design process, always starting with the intention. What is the task? What are you doing in that space? So if you're at the airport, you're in task mode. If you're checking in, once you've checked in, you're now in discovery mode. And then defining what are the different modes people are in when they're in that space before you then can design what can support those modes. Always thinking about all the different users. I think one of the things that very typically happens when you design for big, cool, immersive technology is you think about the end user, the guy that's standing in front of it doing funny stuff. But if you really want to think of it as a platform, you need to understand who the operator is. And you need to design it as much for the person that's operating it, whether it's the internal communications team or the marketing team, as much as for the person that's actually engaging with it. And then also taking into account the overall business goals of that space. We come and we approach these things kind of in three territories. We think of the immersive, which is really the storytelling or the brand component of it. The connected, which is how I connect to this thing, whether it's through my device or gesture or some other identification. And that builds my engagement. And then the intelligent side of it, which is when you start to actually use this information to make it a better experience. And we think about this across all different moments, from before you've entered the space to that moment of arrival, to how you learn how to use this, how you engage with it, and then you take it with you as you leave. And then this starts to become part of a larger digital ecosystem. And so these are some of the elements that may be part of it. You may have an immersive ambient or multimodal experience. You may have some media architecture. You may have some IoT, some voice recognition. But all of these together need to be thought of as a holistic platform that can dynamically change and shift according to the needs of this space. I'm going to show a few examples just to dive in a little deeper of some work. This was a really cool project we worked on for Delos, which is a New York-based company that focuses on how to quantify wellness in the workplace. They have 7 different categories that they can measure to kind of certify your workplace, kind of like LEED certifies the built environment in how eco-friendly it is. This wellness spectrum really talks about the health and wellness of that workplace. So in their headquarters in New York, we built 2 different digital engagements. One was at the reception area, which was really something to engage people in the living lab of this headquarters. So this headquarters included all of the technology and the measuring devices to be able to quantify this information, and this gave you a peek into it. And then the second aspect was something that was actually about engaging with people to change their behavior to make a healthier work environment. So in this first picture here, you can see that this is the reception area. Oh, we'll play this little video and you can see. So that's a little video of the two components. The first one here is really looking at letting you get more information and visualization of each of these different data sets of the quality of the air, the water, fitness, all of those aspects, and lets you really dive into that real-time data of what's happening right now and what's happened over the last number of weeks. Within this, we've also worked with the circadian rhythms to have the light and color palette changing according to the different times of day and the different seasons. And you can see some of the animations here as they appear across that background color. And then in the other aspect, it was really about changing the human behavior and rewarding people who really use that staircase. And so we were inspired by natural patterns that kind of layered and grew on top of each other, like the aurora. And we created this that as time passed, as more people went up and down those stairs, you built this multi-layered complex visualization of all of the paths of travel that then when you stopped on the stairs, you can interact with and engage with, and it gave you a little reward for taking the stairs. So there's this one that was based on ideas of the aurora, and then another one that was based on building up a rain cloud. So starting at the beginning of the day with single drops of rain and growing as people go up and down those stairs to have a torrential downpour that as you walked, you could interact with. And it was a very just fun and playful installation, but it really changed the human behavior in that space. And everybody chose the stairs because it was a really fun experience. And then the next project that I want to just talk about very briefly is a much more kind of straightforward digital signage and wayfinding project that we did for a large bank who had a really complex campus. And across this campus, we created a bunch of wayfinding totems. And these totems both told you the story of what was going on in the bank right then with some real-time data, but also would allow you to come up and navigate throughout that system. There was also an app component that was customized for you. It knew where you were going. You walked up to there, and it helped guide you to where you needed to go. So I would say this is on a very kind of beginning of that engagement, of having a personalized experience. But I think that as the buildings get smarter, it will really allow us to push this a lot further. And here you can see some of the data stories that can unfold based on some of the information that's going on in the bank environment. And then the last thing that I want to show you is about our own office. So in New York, we've got about 750 people in our office across 5 continuous floors. There's 7 floors total. And we have this core stairwell that connects kind of all the different areas to make it a much more communal space. And since we talk so much about the importance of having these dynamic and smart environments, we figured that we would outfit our space with multiple sensors and really use our own office as a living laboratory. So we've put in about 1,500 sensors across the space that measure light, motion, occupancy, air quality. We've gathered all this data. We've spent a lot of time validating the data, and our sensors actually came in, I think they put them in maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, and it was just the beginning. So I would say a lot of our data is pretty poor. I think we're seeing maybe 50 to 60% accuracy in that data. So in about 6 months, we're actually refitting with a new set of sensors that I think we'll be able to get closer to 90+% accuracy with our data. And then we visualize that data so that we can really understand how our spaces are functioning. And we look at it in a number of different aspects. You can see a little bit of our office. And so here, really thinking about what is the human experience of the space. So what do you see when you're sitting at your desk? I think that that's one of the biggest things that when we design for physical environments, we really forget about where people are seeing things from. I think that in this world, we're so used to designing for TV screens that are a very specific place in relation to you, that people just are not set up to think about actually what you see when you look around physical space. So having this ability to understand our visibility, what's accessible from your space, how people flow through the space, and how you connect, where those moments of connectivity happen, is really core to our understanding. I would say, again, this is just at the beginning. We're getting all this data, and now we're merging this group, which is doing all the connected spaces, and our group, which is doing all the digital experience, to figure out how you create useful endpoints in the built environment. So I've got a few ideas about what are the goals. Like how, if you want to create a successful project, how do you have to think about it? What are those goals you have to set up to be successful? I think this first one's really interesting because if you think about a website or an app, when you launch it is usually when it's kind of at its worst. Like it's just launched, and then there's multiple iterations, and you know where people have clicked, and you know where they've looked, and you can take all of that information and you can make it a better digital website. So our spaces need to be able to do the same thing, right? We need to iterate up to when we open, and then once we open, it needs to be an ongoing engagement. And I think all of, especially in the architectural business model, like you're done with the building, thank you, live there, or occupy it for the next 100 years. But really what this needs to be is it needs to be a relationship. We build a platform together, and then we keep designing and evolving it together. And we build it with that intent from the beginning. That space needs to be able to evolve because the changing of our programming needs is incredibly quick. I mean, right now, I think over the next 3 years, we're going to see what workplace means totally shifting. We're already seeing it somewhat with WeWork and all of the cooperative working spaces, the definition of workspace really shifting. And so to build something that's going to stay rigid is foolish at this point. Both the operator and the end user need a clear set of tools and are empowered to optimize that experience. And I think this is a challenging one because very often what the operator considers productive and successful may be in conflict with what the end user thinks of as productive and successful. If I'm working in a company and I want my space to be really fun and playful or whatever it is, at a certain point, productivity of mine may start to go down if I can push it a little bit too far. So, what is that nice crossover where everybody's happy? And then figuring out from the beginning those clear performance goals that can be tracked. And I think as we create smarter buildings, these things can be tracked. So I'm going to posit a few things that I think are going to happen. Whether they're good or bad, I'm not putting any judgment to, but at 3 o'clock after you've eaten lunch and all of the blood is in your stomach and you're not feeling like doing anything, I think there'll be some celebration, a spectacular somewhere in your office that gets you up out of your seats, go meet with other colleagues, have something that kind of kicks you out of that little lull and keeps you moving. And the building knows when it's time to do that because it can see that there's a general lull. I would say that there's going to be seamless security. This is, again, if you make the comparison to the digital world, your phone vibrates when there's an unexpected use of your credit card because it tracks all of your cyber behavior, and it can detect when there's something that's out of line with your cyber behavior. Well, our physical spaces are going to be able to do the exact same thing. Good or bad, I'm not going to pass a judgment at this point, but it is going to make all of this stuff much more seamless. And we're already seeing it where they can detect things 6 miles before you get to the airport, that there's unexpected behavior. I think that we're going to see support of individualized work rhythm, just like when you go to your favorite search engine or your favorite music or video website, it knows who you are and it knows your rhythm. It knows what you like in the morning and what you like in the afternoon. I think your spaces will be able to do the same thing. And similarly, they're going to be able to give you personalized recommendations. And then this one might be the biggest stretch, but I really think it's probably going to happen. I watch my teenagers sitting in Overwatch getting really complicated tasks done with strangers in a virtual world. And I think that the whole next generation, and even this generation of workers, are being highly trained to have complicated task environments in these kind of virtual multi-person spaces. And I think that as our physical spaces become more digital, I think there's going to be an interesting blurring of what our gaming environments are and what our work environments are. And I think we're going to see work moving more towards some of those multi-person gaming environments to support us in accomplishing complicated tasks with large teams of people that may be present or may be remote. So I think that those are all some things that we're going to see happening pretty soon. And I would say that we're at a really exciting moment, but that in order for us to do this right, we need to look at everything that's been developed for the digital design, all of the UI, the user interface, and the user experience design processes that have really been highly developed and honed over the last couple of decades. And we need to learn from that as we think about how we integrate technology, stories, and culture into our physical spaces. So thank you very much. So I'd open if there's any questions. I'm happy to answer questions, or I'm around for a bit. Yeah.
You spoke about changing the sensors. What was the technology you moved from
So the question was, was asked about what we're changing our sensors from and to. We were using, I believe they were called Enlighted, was the sensors that we used initially. And I think it was a mixture of how they were installed, and there wasn't a level of care and accuracy with how they were installed, combined with the sensor collection techniques that was problematic. And I don't actually know what the new ones are. So I can find out. Any other questions? Yeah.
You spoke about the story as being something that needs to be told. The journey that people go through in space is something different. How does the individual stories relate to this journey that people are having through space?
I see. I can throw it. I see. The question was, how does the individual person's stories relate to their journeys through physical space? It's an excellent question. I think that to some extent we've separated our individual stories from those journeys. I think that's something that's happened as more of culture and storytelling happens in the digital space. And I think that this is an opportunity to kind of reweave those things together. But we may not be having the same story as we journey through that space. And I think that that's going to be what's really interesting, is that we'll be able to start to custom curate what our own experiences are of the same space, but very different stories. Here I saw a projection technology here that was at a high enough frame rate that it could deliver totally different content to different people at the same time. And so this idea of being able to start to overlay multiple stories on a single space is I think, going to be really fascinating. One thing that I think is kind of telling of this desire to interweave story and physical and digital is, if you think about the selfie, people, when you take a selfie, you're taking your physical experience and you're putting it into your digital world, right? It's when you start to mush between that physical and digital space, and I mean, everybody takes a selfie now. This is something that's been a phenomenon that I'd say is indicative of people's desire to start being able to merge that physical and digital storytelling. Yeah.
What is your microphone?
You want me to throw? I'll throw you this.
What is the specific disciplines within your group of people at Gensler?
So the question was, what's the specific disciplines in our group? It's a real mix. It's a really difficult set of skills to hire for. It's definitely been one of our biggest challenges because we really need people that are generalists because you need to be able to understand a really diverse toolkit, and people that are into traditional UI UX, they understand a 16:9 rectangle, they understand size type of a certain scale and speed of a certain scale, and then as soon as it becomes a wall, all that stuff is blown away. So we have some UI UX people. We have some people that come from more traditional environmental and graphic design. So people that have worked with wayfinding and signage and understand communication through materials, which is helpful. I want to see more people come from theater. And so that's something that I'm pushing because the world of theater is an obvious place where storytelling in the built environment has been happening for hundreds of years. And theater technology people understand the combination of props and lighting and sound and that integration of experience. But that connection between theatrical theater tech and the built environment is just starting to happen. So it's really generalists that kind of have to learn on the job.
I guess I got a follow-up question. How much do you guys overlap with the rest of the team at Gensler in terms of the interior designers or the architects, project management team?
So how much do we overlap with the other teams within Gensler? Sometimes we work really tightly with them, and sometimes we work directly to our own clients. So I think it can go both ways. I think the physical design is obviously a core part of what we need to do. And so we have people within our own group that do have physical design, that are modeling in Cinema 4D and are working in three-dimensional environments from the very beginning. And the more and more that I can push our teams to be in previs and then working with the real technology, the better we create these experiences. So some of that we do within our group, and some of that we do with our other groups. So
You guys actually develop the content for these installations as well, I'd imagine?
we do, yes. Yeah.
When you're working with bringing on board like your interiors team and your architects team, how do you get them to understand implementing this technology in the space in a way that they're not familiar with? How do you basically get them to be on the same page as you go with the idea that you're trying to?
So the question is, when you're working with these other teams of interior designers and architects, how do you onboard them and get them to understand the implications and the vision and the implications of the technology? So I would say that it's 95% about process, and it's something that one of my big changes that I'm bringing into this company is doing very early rapid prototyping paired with pre-visualization. And so the thing that I've seen, even with our internal teams, is that nobody's on the same page until they've actually seen it and gotten their hands dirty. So, we're redesigning one floor of our office. It's going to hold a couple thousand square feet of infrastructure that will support rapid mock-ups and prototypes. I'm working with vendors so that we are always having technology on the floor so that people can understand what this stuff does well and what it doesn't do well, because everybody wants to watch the Super Bowl on their low-res screen in their lobby, and as we know, that doesn't work. And every interior designer will draw some cool impact wall, but the reality of it is that it doesn't actually fit there because you can't see it because it's around a corner, and there isn't that connection with what that technology can and can't do. So it's really about, and that goes back to this agile design process. You can only be agile if you're working with the actual tools, right? A digital designer is working in pixels for pixels. So if we're going to use technology in an agile way, we need to be working with LED pixels to design for LED pixels, or projection to design for projection. And so that's what we're implementing to really onboard the whole team and the client, because the client needs to be educated and understand why it's another $500,000 investment if you want to be able to see their logo beautifully rendered across that screen. And as soon as they see it, it's easy. It's an easy discussion. But you can't do that in a rendering. So, yeah, I guess. Yep. Oh, it's time. Thank you very much.